Welcome to composition tutorial number 4. Today, we will begin the introduction to 4-part writing, with things like voices, rules, harmony, and cadences being included. To start off with, let's talk about voices. In 4-part writing, we usually have 4 different voices, each with their own roles. We have the soprano, the alto, the tenor, and the bass. The soprano usually carries the melody, as it is the highest voice. The alto and tenor usually are the second and third highest voices, and usually serve as harmonic support. However, in certain counterpoint, you can also use them for different counterpoint voices. The bass is the lowest voice. Now this is where our root of our harmony comes in, and determines how strong or how weak our chord is. Now, open and close harmony refers to the interval between the tenor and the soprano. Closed harmony refers to when the space or interval between the tenor and soprano is less than an octave. Open harmony is when this interval is more than an octave. The reason why this is important in 4-part writing is because it contributes to either space of expansiveness or a feeling of closedness, hence the name open and closed harmony. In 4-part writing, there are different rules that you should avoid trying to break. For example, we should avoid making certain voices have parallel lines. For example, if I have a C major scale in my soprano, I should avoid having that in my alto or tenor or bass. Similarly, if my soprano and alto are a fifth apart, or let's say if my alto is on a C and my soprano is on a G, I should avoid moving them in parallel. For example, if my alto ends up on a D, you should avoid having your soprano end up on an A. This is the same case if your voices are a fourth apart, like for example, C and F. These are known as parallel fourths and fifths, and you should avoid using them because they make the music sound empty. Additionally, when you are writing for 4 voices, you should also avoid trying to overlap them. What I mean by this is if your soprano is moving from one direction to another, you should avoid having your alto voice cross that and move in the opposite direction above your soprano. You should also resolve your leading tone if you have any. For example, if your main tonic is your C major, then you should resolve a B to a C. Finally, when you're making progressions, you should always keep in mind that 4-part harmony usually likes common tones. For example, if you have a C major chord, an E minor chord has 2 common tones, which means that it is a very smooth and very easy transition. Now, let's talk about the concept of progressions and inversions. In these things, you want to make sure to avoid certain mistakes that beginner composers often make. To start off with, common tones are one of the most important parts of harmony. Especially in 4-part writing, you want to have common tones in order to keep it more consonant or less dissonant. Another thing is voicing or inversions. For example, if you want to move to a G major chord from a C major chord, you don't just have a root position triad move to another root position triad. It would sound awkward, clunky, and also has parallel motion in it, which you do not want. Instead, you can keep the common tone of G and move the C and E down 1 whole step or 1/2 step, and then land on a G major chord in first inversion. This would keep a common tone while also making it sound smoother. It's the same harmonic progression, but the impact is completely different. Of course, this all depends on what you're trying to achieve, but generally, this is what you want to do. Now, let's talk about cadences. In music, a cadence is often known as a turning point. We want to have cadences because they bring out a resolution of our melodic phrase, or a resolution of a specific section that can lead into a more developmental section. We will go over some of the more common types of cadences in this video. Let's start off with the authentic cadence. The authentic cadence is moving from our dominant to the tonic. For example, if we are in the key of C major, we will move from a G major chord to a C major chord. This is a very, very, very strong cadence, and we will often use it at the end of certain sections in order to create a strong resolution. However, this is not always the case, as there are two types of authentic cadences. We have the perfect authentic cadence and the imperfect authentic cadence. The perfect authentic cadence is the more resolving one. We have an insanely powerful resolution that we often use to end off pieces. Please avoid using this in the middle of your piece, as it will make your piece sound like it is coming to an end without it developing anything. However, our imperfect authentic cadence is weaker. In fact, we use those inversions we talked about earlier sometimes in order to make it sound weak and create interest for upcoming sections of the piece of music. Now, let's talk about the differences. First, our voicing or inversions. For perfect authentic cadences, both chords must be in root position. It does not mean that we have to have triads, but we must have the root or bass always be the root of both chords. If we are in the C major key, an authentic cadence that is perfect will have G to C in the bass. However, in imperfect authentic cadences, you may always swap around whatever voices that you have. Similarly, in the soprano, the final note of the soprano must always end up on the tonic. If you're in a perfect authentic cadence for C major, your soprano must always end up on a C. This is most commonly found when you move from the leading tone of B to C, as this is a very, very strong resolution as well. However, you can always end up on something different for your imperfect authentic cadence. I should note that sometimes someone may even swap out the dominant for a diminished seventh instead of the dominant chord. This still resolves the leading tone, but it has a completely different vibe and makes it even weaker. Next up, we have the plagal cadence. The plagal cadence, also known as the amen cadence, has a different feel to the authentic cadence, but similarly is also resolving. You may recognize this cadence because it is found at the end of most church hymns. I will play an example here. Hear that? That is an iconic progression that's used a lot in religious music. Next up, we have a slightly less resolving cadence known as the half cadence. In music theory classes, they often teach this as moving from the subdominant to the dominant, which then prepares you for either moving to your tonic or moving somewhere else. In fact, a 4-5-1 progression or a subdominant dominant tonic progression is one of the most common progressions used ever. However, a half cadence does not have to come from the subdominant. It can come from any scale tone, As long as you land on the dominant, it is considered a half cadence. Moving from our half cadence, we can even move somewhere else. This is known as a deceptive cadence, where we move to our sixth scale tone, or the submediant. However, we do not have to go from our dominant. Similar to the half cadence, it always just has to end up on the submediant. This is known as a deceptive cadence because it moves to a key that might be unfamiliar or might imply that you're trying to develop something in the piece of music. Now, all of these cadences have certain rules, such as in the plagal cadence, if you want the full resolution, you must move from your subdominant to your tonic. I will not enforce these rules on you, however, as they're not always applicable. But usually in 4-part harmony, you often want to use these rules as they give you the most complete and authentic sound. Remember, music theory is not a set of rules. It is a set of observations that people have made throughout history that sound good in music. So if you think something will sound better some other way or voiced some other way, then go ahead. When you first start out plotting your piece or writing a piece of music, I will often recommend you to start plotting out your harmonies. This is because that gives you a structural foundation to know where your piece is headed or know where you want to go to ensure that your piece is paced properly. Another reason why plotting harmonies is important is because in this day and age, a lot of music that we listen to will often have simple progressions, and as such, the melodies that we come up with will often be in line with these simpler progressions. As such, in order to not fall into a loop, we might consider plotting out progressions in order to write our melody around them instead. Thank you for joining us for this composition tutorial. Join us next time as we discuss the concept of melodic writing and delve into its various facets and how to write a proper melody and what mistakes not to make. Until then, see you all next time.